The kitchen was a battlefield, and Ethan Carter was losing. Flour dusted his borrowed apron. His hands fumbled with a rolling pin, and the dough beneath his fingers refused to cooperate. He, a millionaire who'd built a tech empire from nothing, was undone by pie crust in a modest Syracuse kitchen. It was his third day pretending to be a cook for his fiancée's family, and the charade was unraveling. Ethan, who'd dined at Michelin-star restaurants and closed deals over champagne, had lied to win over the Wilsons, Mark's fiercely traditional family. Mark, his golden-haired love, had begged him to blend in, to be normal for one weekend. So Ethan traded his tailored suits for a thrift store apron and claimed to be a small-town chef. The Wilsons, especially Mark's mother, Clara, valued hard work and humility, traits she doubted in Ethan's polished demeanor. But now, as Clara's sharp eyes watched him mangle her grandmother's pie recipe, Ethan felt the weight of his deception. "Ethan, dear," Clara said, her voice honeyed but edged, "you said you've cooked for years, but that dough looks like it's fighting you." She leaned against the counter, her silver hair catching the afternoon light filtering through the window. Ethan forced a laugh, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's got a mind of its own, Mrs. Wilson." He glanced at Mark across the room, whose mouth relaxed. Easy for him to say. Mark, with his easy charm and lifelong practice at pleasing his family, didn't have to lie about who he was. The Wilsons' home was a snapshot of middle-class America, a cozy, slightly worn two-story house with faded wallpaper and a backyard that smelled of fresh-cut grass. It was the kind of place Ethan, raised in Manhattan penthouses, had only seen in movies. He'd fallen for Mark's warmth, his unpretentious laugh, during a chance meeting at a charity gala. Mark, a teacher with a heart bigger than his paycheck, was everything Ethan's world of cold ambition lacked. But the Wilsons didn't trust wealth, and Mark feared they'd see Ethan as an outsider, a rich city boy who'd never understand their values. So Ethan liet. He crafted a backstory as Ethan Cole, a line cook from a diner in Rochester, scraping by but passionate about food. It was supposed to be simple. Charm them, cook a few meals, propose to Mark with their blessing. But the lie was a house of cards, and every moment in that kitchen felt like a gust threatening to topple it. That night, as Ethan and Mark sat on the porch swing, the summer air thick with fireflies, Mark squeezed his hand. "You're doing great," he whispered, his blue eyes catching the porch light. "Mom's warming up to you." Ethan snorted. "She's warming up to the guy who can't roll dough. I'm a fraud, Mark. You're here. That's what matters." Mark's voice was soft, but there was a flicker of worry in his gaze. Ethan wanted to confess everything. His fortune, his tech empire, the private jet waiting an hour away. But Mark's trust, so fragile and precious, held him back. The next morning, Clara tasked Ethan with cooking Sunday brunch for the extended family. 20 people, all expecting a spread worthy of her approval. Ethan panicked. His culinary skills were limited to ordering takeout and reheating leftovers. He'd been Googling recipes in secret, but a full brunch? That was a minefield. He woke at dawn, sneaking into the kitchen to practice. As he cracked eggs into a bowl, the back door creaked open. It was Sarah, Mark's younger sister, a quiet 19-year-old with sharp green eyes. She'd been distant all weekend, watching Ethan like a hawk. "Up early," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Most cooks I know don't look so nervous." Ethan's pulse spiked. "Just wanted to be perfect," he said, forcing a smile. Sarah tilted her head, studying him. "You're not a cook, are you?" The question hit like a punch. Ethan froze, the whisk in his hand trembling. "What makes you say that?" "Your hands," she said, stepping closer. "No calluses, no burns. And you hold a knife like you're scared of it." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were unrelenting. "Who are you really, Ethan?" He opened his mouth to lie again, but something in her gaze stopped him. Sarah wasn't like Clara, who judged based on tradition, or Mark, who saw the best in everyone. She was a truth seeker, and she'd caught his scent. "I'm just trying to make this work," he said finally, his voice low. "For Mark." Sarah didn't blink. If you're lying to him, it won't end well. Secrets don't stay buried in this family. She left him there, the weight of her words sinking in. Ethan knew he was on borrowed time. As he scrambled to prepare brunch, his mind raced. What was Sarah hiding? Did she know something about him? Or was she fishing? And worse, what if Mark's family wasn't as perfect as they seemed? By noon, the house buzzed with relatives, uncles in flannel, cousins with loud laughs, and Clara presiding like a queen. Ethan served lumpy pancakes and slightly burnt bacon, his nerves fraying with every forced compliment. Mark shot him encouraging smiles, but Sarah's stare never wavered. As the meal ended, Clara stood, clinking her glass. Ethan's worked hard to fit in, she said, her tone unreadable. But family is about trust, and I'm not sure we know the real Ethan yet. The room fell silent. Mark's face paled. Ethan's heart pounded as he realized the charade was crumbling, and something darker, something hidden in this family, was about to surface. Ethan's fork clattered against his plate, the sound swallowed by the tense silence following Clara's words. Every eye in the crowded dining room turned to him, and he felt like a deer caught in headlights. Mark's hand, warm under the table, squeezed his knee, but it did little to ease the panic clawing at Ethan's chest. I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Wilson," Ethan stammered, his voice betraying the confidence he'd honed in boardrooms. He was used to commanding attention, not shrinking from it, but Clara's piercing gaze stripped him bare. Clara's smile was tight, almost pitying. "Oh, Ethan, let's not play games. You know Cook. I've watched you fumble all weekend. What I want to know is why you're pretending." Mark jumped in, his voice sharp. "Mom, stop. Ethan's here for me. Isn't that enough?" "Not if he's lying," Clara snapped, her composure cracking. "This family doesn't tolerate deceit." Ethan's mind raced. He could confess now. Tell them he was Ethan Carter, tech mogul worth millions, not Ethan Cole, the diner cook. But the truth would alienate them further, painting him as the rich outsider Mark had feared they'd reject. Worse, it would hurt Mark, who'd trusted him to pull this off. Before he could speak, Sarah stood, her chair scraping the floor. "Maybe Ethan's not the only one hiding something," she said, her voice low but cutting. All heads swiveled to her, and Ethan caught a flicker of fear in Clara's eyes. "Sarah, enough," Clara said, her tone a warning. But Sarah didn't back down. "No, Mom, you're so quick to judge him, but what about your secrets? What about Dad?" The room erupted in murmurs. Mark's uncle, Tom, a burly man with a graying beard, slammed his hand on the table. "Sarah, you watch your mouth. This ain't the time." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Dad?" Mark's father, Richard, had died years ago. Mark had told him so. A car accident when Mark was in high school. So what was Sarah implying? Mark's face was ashen. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" Sarah's eyes glistened, but her jaw was set. "I heard you and Mom arguing last year. About Dad. About how he didn't really—" She stopped, glancing at Ethan, as if remembering he was an outsider. Clara's voice was ice. "This is family business, Sarah, not for strangers." The word strangers hit Ethan like a slap. He was losing ground, and the family's cracks were starting to show. He needed to regain control, to shift the focus. "I haven't been honest," he said, standing. All eyes snapped back to him. "I'm not a professional cook. I'm trying to learn. For Mark. I wanted to impress you all because I love him." It was a half-truth, but it softened the room. Mark's aunt, Linda, gave a small nod, and a few cousins relaxed. Clara, though, wasn't swayed. "Love doesn't excuse lies," she said. "What else are you hiding?" The question hung in the air. Ethan wanted to tell Mark everything, to pull him aside and confess, but Sarah's words about her father gnawed at him. What secret was she hinting at? And why did Clara look so rattled? That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay beside Mark in the guest room, the creaky bed a stark contrast to his Manhattan penthouse. Mark's breathing was steady, but Ethan's mind churned. He slipped out of bed and padded downstairs, needing air. In the kitchen, he found Sarah, sitting at the table with a mug of tea. "You're up late," she said, not looking at him. So are you. Ethan sat across from her, the silence heavy. What's going on, Sarah? What did you mean about your dad? She stared into her mug, her fingers tight around it. You're not the only one pretending, Ethan. This family's built on secrets. If you love Mark, you'll figure that out before it's too late. Tell me, he pressed, his voice low. I can't help if I don't know. Sarah's eyes met his, sharp and guarded. Dad didn't die in a car accident. That's what Mom told everyone. But I found letters in the attic last year. He left us, walked out, and Mom's been lying about it ever since. Ethan's stomach dropped. Mark had built his life around the memory of a heroic father, taken too soon. If that was a lie, it would shatter him. Does Mark know? Ethan asked. Sarah shook her head. I tried to tell him once, but he wouldn't listen. He idolizes Dad, and Mom, she'll do anything to keep it buried. Ethan leaned back, the weight of her words settling in. His own life felt small compared to this. But if he exposed Clara's secret, it could destroy Mark's trust in his family, and in Ethan for digging it up. The next day, Ethan doubled down on his role as the cook, determined to win Clara's approval while he figured out what to do. He spent hours in the kitchen, following YouTube tutorials to make a roast chicken dinner. Clara hovered, her criticism sharp but less hostile. Mark, meanwhile, was distracted, his usual warmth dimmed by the tension for brunch. As Ethan served the chicken, he caught Sarah watching him again. She gave a small nod, as if acknowledging his effort to keep up the act. But her words from the night before echoed, secrets don't stay buried. By evening, Ethan knew he couldn't keep pretending forever. He had to tell Mark the truth about his wealth, his lie, and what he'd learned about Richard. But as he pulled Mark aside in the backyard, the words stuck in his throat. Mark looked at him, his eyes searching. What's wrong, Ethan? You've been off all day. Ethan took a deep breath, his heart pounding. Mark, there's something I need to tell you. About me, and about your family. Mark's face tightened, a flicker of fear in his eyes. What do you mean? Before Ethan could answer, a shout came from the house. Clara stood at the back door, her face pale. Sarah's gone. She left a note. She's digging into things she shouldn't. Ethan's blood ran cold. Sarah was chasing the truth, and it was about to blow everything apart. Ethan's heart raced as he followed Mark and Clara into the living room, where the note lay crumpled on the coffee table. Clara's hands trembled as she read it aloud. I'm done with the lies. I'm finding the truth about Dad. Don't follow me. The words hung heavy, and Ethan saw the cracks in the Wilson family deepen. Mark's voice broke the silence. What does she mean, Mom? What truth? His eyes, usually so warm, were sharp with confusion and hurt. Clara sank into an armchair, her face a mask of control fraying at the edges. She's just upset, she said, but her voice wavered. She's young, reckless. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Ethan stayed silent, his mind spinning. Sarah's revelation about Richard abandoning the family gnawed at him. He wanted to protect Mark, but his own lie, pretending to be a humble cook while hiding his millions, felt like a betrayal stacking on top of the family secrets. If he spoke now, he risked everything. Mark grabbed his car keys. I'm going after her. She's my sister. I can't let her do this alone. Clara stood, her voice sharp. No, Mark, let her go. She'll come back when she's ready. But Mark wasn't listening. He turned to Ethan, his expression desperate. Come with me, please. Ethan nodded, his chest tight. He couldn't refuse Mark, not when he looked so lost. But as they headed for the door, Clara grabbed Ethan's arm. You're not one of us, she hissed, low enough that Mark couldn't hear. Whatever you're hiding, it won't end well for you. Her words stung, but Ethan shook her off and followed Mark to the car. They drove in silence, the Syracuse suburbs blurring past. Mark's hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. What's going on, Ethan? He asked finally. You know something, don't you? Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to confess everything, his wealth, Sarah's discovery. But the fear of losing Mark stopped him. I just want to help, he said, hating how weak it sounded. Mark glanced at him, his eyes searching. I trust you. Don't make me regret it. They tracked Sarah to a small library in downtown Syracuse, where she'd mentioned digging for answers. Inside, they found her hunched over a computer, old newspaper archives open on screen. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Sarah," Mark called, his voice soft but urgent. "What are you doing?" She didn't look up. "Looking for Dad. The real story. Mom's been lying to us, Mark. He didn't die." Mark froze, his breath catching. "What are you talking about?" "Dad died in a car crash. I was there when Mom got the call." Sarah turned, her expression fierce. "That's what she told us. But I found letters. He left us, Mark." He walked out, and Mom covered up to save face. Mark staggered back as if slapped. Ethan stepped forward, his instincts screaming to comfort him. But Mark held up a hand. "Is this true?" he asked Ethan, his voice breaking. Ethan hesitated, trapped between his love for Mark and the truth he'd uncovered. "Sarah told me last night," he admitted. "I didn't know how to tell you." Mark's face crumpled, betrayal flashing in his eyes. "You knew? And you didn't say anything?" "I wanted to protect you," Ethan said, his voice raw. "I didn't want to hurt you." Sarah stood, slamming the laptop shut. "You're both missing the point. Mom's been lying for years, and I think she's still hiding something. I found an address in those letters, a house Dad might be living in now. I'm going there." Mark shook his head, his voice rising. "This is crazy, Sarah. You can't just chase ghosts. What if you're wrong?" "I'm not wrong," she snapped. "And if you don't come with me, I'll go alone." Ethan saw the pain in Mark's eyes, the way his world was unraveling. He wanted to fix it, to be the steady presence Mark needed. But his own deception loomed like a shadow. "I'll go with you," Ethan said, meeting Sarah's gaze. "Both of you." They drove an hour north to a small town, the address leading them to a run-down house with peeling paint and an overgrown lawn. Sarah knocked, her fists trembling. When the door opened, a man stood there, older, graying, but unmistakably Richard Wilson. His eyes widened as he saw Sarah and Mark. "Dad," Mark whispered, his voice breaking. Richard's face paled. "Mark, Sarah," he stepped back, as if retreat was his only instinct. Sarah's voice was steel. "Why did you leave? Why did Mom lie?" Richard's shoulders sagged. "It's complicated. Your mother and we had problems. I wasn't the man she wanted me to be." Mark's voice was raw. "You let us think you were dead. Do you know what that did to us?" Ethan stood back, his heart aching for Mark. He wanted to pull him close, to shield him from this pain, but he felt like an intruder. Richard's eyes flicked to him. "Who's this?" "Ethan," Mark said, his voice flat. "My fiancé." Richard's brow furrowed, but he said nothing. The silence was suffocating, broken only by Sarah's sharp intake of breath. "You don't get to judge," she said to Richard. "You lost that right when you walked away." As they drove back to Syracuse, Mark was silent, his hands clenched in his lap. Ethan reached for him, but Mark pulled away. "You knew," Mark said again, his voice barely a whisper, "and you're still hiding something. I can feel it." Ethan's chest tightened. The truth about his identity was a ticking bomb, and he was running out of time to defuse it. Back at the Wilson house, Clara was waiting, her face a storm of anger and fear. "You had no right," she spat at Sarah. "And you," she turned to Ethan, "you're tearing this family apart." Ethan met her gaze, his resolve hardening. He couldn't keep lying, not when Mark was hurting. But before he could speak, Sarah dropped another bombshell. "I found something else in those letters," she said. "Dad wasn't just hiding from us. He was hiding from someone else, someone dangerous." The air in the Wilson living room crackled with tension, Sarah's words hanging like a storm cloud. Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of this unraveling family. Mark stood frozen, his face a mix of betrayal and disbelief, while Clara's eyes darted between her children, her composure shattered. "Someone dangerous?" Mark echoed, his voice hoarse. "What does that mean, Sarah?" Sarah pulled a crumpled letter from her pocket, its edges worn from handling. It was in Dad's letters. He mentioned owing money to someone, a man named Victor Crane. He said Crane was after him, that he had to disappear to protect us. Clara's face drained of color. "That's enough, Sarah," she snapped, but her voice trembled. "You're digging up things that don't concern you." Don't concern me? Sarah's voice rose, sharp with defiance. You lied about Dad being dead, and now you're hiding this? Who's Victor Crane, Mom? Ethan watched Clara closely, his instincts honed from years of reading boardroom opponents. She was scared, not just of the truth coming out, but of something bigger. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Mrs. Wilson, if there's a threat to Mark and Sarah, you need to tell us. I can help. Clara's eyes narrowed. Help? You, the man who's been lying to us all weekend? I don't trust you, Ethan. Mark's head snapped up, his gaze locking on Ethan. What's she talking about? Ethan's heart sank. The moment he dreaded was here, and there was no escaping it. Mark, I was going to tell you, he started, his voice low. I'm not a cook. I'm Ethan Carter. I own a tech company. I'm worth a lot of money. I lied because I thought your family wouldn't accept me otherwise. The silence was deafening. Mark's face twisted, a mix of hurt and anger. You're a millionaire? And you thought lying was the answer? What else haven't you told me? I didn't want to lose you, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I love you, Mark. I thought this was the only way. Mark turned away, his shoulders rigid. Ethan felt the distance between them like a chasm. But before he could say more, Sarah cut in. This isn't about Ethan right now. Mom, who's Victor Crane? Clara sank back in her chair, her hands trembling. Your father got mixed up with bad people, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor was a loan shark. Richard borrowed money to start a business, but it failed. He couldn't pay it back. Victor threatened us, said he'd come after you kids if Richard didn't disappear. So he left. I told everyone he died to keep you safe. Mark's voice was raw. You let us grieve him. You let me think he was a hero. I had no choice, Clara said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was protecting you. Ethan's mind raced. A loan shark? That explained Richard's disappearance. But it didn't explain why Clara was still so scared. Is Crane still a threat? He asked. Clara hesitated, then nodded. I've heard rumors he's back in Syracuse. I don't know why. Sarah's eyes blazed. Then we need to find him. End this. No, Clara snapped. You stay away from him. He's dangerous. But Sarah was already grabbing her jacket. I'm not letting this ruin us anymore. I'm going to the police. Mark grabbed her arm. Sarah, wait. We need to think this through. Ethan saw his chance to step up, to prove he was more than his lie. I have resources, he said. Private investigators, security teams. I can find out who Crane is and what he wants. But you have to trust me, Mark. Mark's eyes were cold. Trust you? After you lied about who you are. I know I messed up, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Let me help. Mark didn't respond, but he didn't stop Ethan either. They spent the night planning, Ethan using his phone to contact his team in Manhattan. By morning, he'd hired a private investigator to track Victor Crane. The PI reported back quickly. Crane was a known figure in Syracuse's underbelly, recently spotted near the old warehouse district. Sarah insisted on going with Ethan to scope out the area, despite Mark's protests. I'm not sitting this out, she said. This is my family. Reluctantly, Mark joined them, and the three drove to the warehouse district, a maze of rusted buildings and flickering streetlights. Ethan's investigator had pinpointed a bar where Crane was rumored to hang out. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and suspicion. Ethan scanned the room, his nerves on edge. He wasn't used to this world, but he'd do anything for Mark. A man in a leather jacket approached, his eyes cold. You looking for someone? He asked, his voice low. Ethan squared his shoulders. Victor Crane. The man's lips curled into a smirk. You're an over-your-head, pretty boy. Crane doesn't like strangers sniffing around. Before Ethan could respond, a hand grabbed his shoulder. He turned to see Mark, his face pale but determined. We're not leaving until we get answers, Mark said, his voice steady. The man laughed, but something in Mark's eyes made him back off. As they left the bar, Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from his investigator. Crane's at a warehouse on 5th Street. Be careful. They drove to the warehouse, the tension between them palpable. Ethan wanted to reach for Mark, to bridge the gap his lie had created, but Mark's walls were up. As they approached the warehouse, a figure stepped out of the shadows, tall, grizzled, with eyes that cut through the dark. "You must be Crane," Ethan said, stepping forward. Crane's gaze flicked over them, lingering on Sarah. "You're Richard's kids," he said, his voice gravelly. "You shouldn't be here." Victor Crane's presence was a cold weight in the dim warehouse lot, his shadow stretching long under the flickering streetlights. Ethan stood in front of Mark and Sarah, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. "We're here about Richard Wilson," he said. "What do you want with his family?" Crane's eyes narrowed, assessing Ethan like a predator sizing up prey. "You're not a Wilson," he said. "Why do you care?" "Because I love them," Ethan replied, glancing at Mark. Mark's face was unreadable, but his hand twitched, as if fighting the urge to reach out. Sarah stepped forward, her voice fierce. "You scared our dad away. You threatened us. Why are you back now?" Crane's smirk faded. "Richard owed me a lot of money. What he couldn't pay, he ran. I've been looking for him ever since. Word is he's back in town." Mark's voice was raw. "You're lying. He's been gone for years." Crane shrugged. "Believe what you want, but I don't forget debts. And I don't like kids meddling in my business." Ethan's mind raced. His investigator had warned that Crane was dangerous, but there was something off. Crane seemed more desperate than menacing. "If it's money you want," Ethan said, "I can pay. Name your price." Crane's eyes flicked to Ethan, calculating. "You got that kind of cash, kid?" "I do," Ethan said, his tone firm. "But you leave this family alone." Mark grabbed Ethan's arm, his voice low. "What are you doing? You can't just—" "I'm fixing this," Ethan said, meeting Mark's gaze. "I lied to you, and I'm sorry. But I'm not letting this guy hurt you." Crane laughed, a harsh sound. "You think money solves everything? This ain't just about cash. Richard made promises he didn't keep. And I hear his wife's been talking, stirring up trouble." Sarah's eyes widened. "Mom, what does she have to do with this?" Before Crane could answer, headlights swept across the lot. A car screeched to a stop, and Clara stepped out, her face pale but resolute. "Enough," she called, striding toward them. "Victor, this ends now." Crane's expression hardened. "Clara, you should have stayed out of this." "I kept your secret for years," Clara said, her voice trembling but strong. "I lied to my kids, let them think their father was dead, all to protect them from you. But I'm done." Mark's voice broke. "Mom, what's going on?" Clara turned to her children, tears streaming down her face. "Your father didn't just owe money. He was working for Victor, running errands, shady deals. When he wanted out, Victor threatened us. I told Richard to leave, to save you both. I thought I was protecting you." Sarah's voice was a whisper. "You let us believe he was dead." "I had no choice," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Victor said he'd come after you if I told the truth." Ethan stepped forward, his resolve hardening. "Crane, it's over. I've got people watching you, private investigators, lawyers. You touch this family, and you're done." Crane's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Ethan's wealth, once a source of his shame, was now his weapon. He pulled out his phone, showing Crane a text from his investigator. "Police en route. Evidence of your operations sent to Syracuse PD." Crane's eyes darkened, but he raised his hands. "You win, rich boy, but this ain't over." He backed away, disappearing into the shadows as sirens wailed in the distance. The ride back to the Wilson house was silent, the weight of truths and lies pressing down on them. Clara sat in the back, her hands folded, while Mark stared out the window, his face etched with pain. Ethan drove, his heart heavy with the damage his deception had caused. Back at the house, Mark finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "I need time, Ethan. You lied to me. About everything." "I know," Ethan said, his throat tight. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust again." Mark didn't respond, but he didn't pull away when Ethan reached for his hand. It was a small gesture, a flicker of hope. Over the next week, the Wilsons began to heal. Clara opened up to her children, sharing the full story of Richard's departure and her fear of Victor Crane. Sarah, though angry, forgave her mother, driven by a fierce need to rebuild their family. Mark, still reeling, started talking to Ethan again, their conversations tentative but honest. Ethan used his resources to ensure Crane's arrest, working with the police to dismantle his operations. He also funded therapy for the Wilsons, helping them process the years of lies. Slowly, Mark began to see Ethan not as the millionaire who'd deceived him, but as the man who'd stood by him when it mattered most. One evening, by the lakeside where they'd shared so many quiet moments, Ethan took Mark's hand. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady. "I should have trusted you with the truth. I want to build a life with you. Honest, real, no more secrets." Mark's eyes softened, a tear slipping down his cheek. "You hurt me, Ethan, but you also fought for us. I don't know if I'm ready to say yes to forever, but I'm willing to try." They stood there, the lake reflecting the stars, their hands intertwined. The Wilsons' secrets had broken them, but they'd also forged something stronger, a family learning to trust again, and a love tested but unbroken. Clara watched from the porch, a small smile on her lips. She'd lost so much to lies, but in her children's resilience, she saw redemption. Ethan wasn't the man she'd expected, but he was the one her son needed. And for the first time in years, she felt free.